Lots of questions heading into the offseason for the St. Louis Cardinals. Payroll, Oli Marmol, hitting coaches, Hein Bloom, trades, and a whole lot more. Today, we've got Jeff Jones joining us to help answer some of those questions on today's episode of Locked On Cardinals.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily St. Louis Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Cardinals fans. I'm JD Hafford, and I'm a national radio sports anchor, born and raised in the Lou and a lifetime Cardinals fan, and I'm your host for Locked On Cardinals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Follow me on Twitter, X at JD Sports Radio, and the podcast at LO_Cardinals. We want to thank those of you who make Locked On Cardinals your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. This is a show serving Cardinal Nation and giving the best fans in baseball all of the info about the birds on the bat. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start this season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So the reset for the St. Louis Cardinals is coming, which has led a lot of us to debate on what the Cardinals may or may not do heading into 2025. And to help guide us through what we know so far is our buddy Jeff Jones, who covers the Cardinals for the Belleville News Democrat, and you can check out his work at bnd.com. Jeff, thank you as always for hopping on here today. How's the offseason been for you thus far? You doing okay?
It's been pretty good. You know, you have really good baseball to watch here over the last couple of weeks, so it's been a nice little soft landing into the winter for me here.
Yeah, these games have been pretty darn exciting. Like, it's a shame that the Cardinals aren't a part of it. It makes you kind of, yearn to have that back at Busch Stadium, but it's been an entertaining playoff so far in Major League Baseball. The 2024 season, although much better than what 2023 was for the Cardinals, still fell short of expectations, of ownership, front office, coaches, team, obviously the fan base who just kind of quit coming to games altogether. A lot of fans showed their displeasure with the coaching staff that has been in charge over the last couple of seasons, that they want to point fingers at, anybody and everybody right now. It's their fault. It's this person's fault. And somebody who's come under a lot of scrutiny has been the coaching staff. Oli Marmol, former hitting coach Turner Ward, obviously was, branded the evil person on the roster. It's why nobody could hit anymore. He's not going to be retained for next year. Pitching coach Dusty Blake, although didn't catch as much heat as he did in 2023. No manager is perfect by any means, but even the best ones will make mistakes from time to time. And I've constantly been kind of, I don't want to say an Oli apologist by any means, but I haven't thought that Oli has been the biggest issue that's going on with the Cardinals. I think he had a rough go in that second year when he didn't have, Albert and Yachty and Waino. I think he learned from it. I thought he was better this season. But how did you feel about Oli's managerial skills in 2024? Is he as bad as some people make him out to be, in your opinion?
No, not even close. In fact, I would say that he is by far and away easily in the top half of in-game managers in Major League Baseball right now. I without sitting down and ranking all 30, I would hesitate to put him much better than that. But no, all the confidence in the world in terms of what he can do as an in-game manager. And then in terms of, how that gets reflected in the clubhouse, look, I think that he definitely made some mistakes in 2023 with the way some things were handled. I think that there are parts of that were on him and parts of that were on the front office, kind of passing down things that created kind of unfair or uneven messaging maybe. And I think that, even a year ago, most folks in the organization, and especially now with benefit of hindsight, would be willing to admit that the sort of dramatic swing of 2023 caught a lot of people off guard. And there were very few folks who were kind of at their best throughout that season. So definitely look, that makes up a third of his managerial resume to date, right? So you weigh it the way you would weigh anything else. But I would hesitate to take a lot away from that season in terms of what a gauge is, for his ability moving forward. And then in terms of this past season, I really do struggle to find areas where anybody would I don't know what the criticism of him would be for this past season, right? I really, outside of kind of, just the kind of naked, we don't like this guy coming off of 23 that accompanies it, I really struggle to find places where he individually in his performance was somehow below expectations. You can say what you want about the batting order, I guess, with Goldschmidt and Arenado, but realistically, the team was not going to be any better than they were without those two guys being at least something close to what they were earlier in their careers. There was a lot of complaining about the frequency of off days for Mason Wynn early in the season. The guy played 150 games at shortstop and did it fighting through injuries, right? Like, clearly there was a plan in place to get him some days off early in the season so he could play. I think at one point he played like 50 straight games down the stretch in the summer, which, again, was reported at the time, like, there's a plan for this, there's a rationale for this. And nobody wanted to hear because Brandon Crawford was 0 for April, and it was hard to watch, right? But it really is. It would be difficult for me to find a lot to criticize about the way the manager performed this past season in terms of, what was happening on the field, and also kind of the way that he was able to shepherd the clubhouse through what was not a tumultuous season, but I think just kind of a disappointing season for a lot of folks. And I think, crucially, the fact that poor performances for basically the entire year from their two most important hitters didn't seem to drag down much of anyone else, at least spirits-wise. I think that is to his credit to some extent.
We know Turner Ward is not going to come back. He's not going to be the hitting coach, whether things because the offense was so bad, specifically the runners in scoring position. We all know the issues there, whether they're his fault or not, because I constantly am the guy that's like, well, he can't swing the bat for him. He can give you all the information in the world, but if you don't do your job, it doesn't matter. But there's been speculation, obviously, on who might take over the role of hitting coach coming up in 2025. I would assume it's going to be someone already within the organization because that's just kind of the Cardinal thing to do. But what are some names that you've been seeing that could possibly take over that role for next year?
So, there are definitely some internal options which stand out. The team is retaining Brandon Allen, who is the assistant hitting coach, who was previously the Memphis hitting coach, who has a lot of fans throughout the organization and on the big league roster. Right? Like Mason Wynn in particular is a guy who did a lot of work with BA, has for the last 2 years, and found him to be a really effective messenger, who's obviously helped him a lot. Howie Clark was the hitting coach at Memphis for the last couple of years, was previously a big league hitting coach with the White Sox. If you're talking about a guy who is internal and has experience and is kind of on the same page with everyone, he's a guy who would make sense in that role as well. Then you kind of look at, Ben Johnson has been managing in Memphis for a good little while now. Again, is popular with guys throughout the organization. Does he want a step up into the big leagues? A lot of times, a AAA manager is a hard thing to hold on to for whatever it is, the 4 or 5 years now that Ben has been managing a AAA. And so you wonder, is that the kind of position that the Cardinals would maybe look to fill in and get him to the big leagues? The other guy that really, well, so there are two other guys. One is technically inside the organization, that being Ryan Ludwig. Obviously, we sort of well documented the success that he had with Victor Scott in particular, but also just sort of in his role throughout the system as a roving instructor. Definitely someone who stands out, if he's in a spot now where he is interested in that. There was a while there, he's got a young family where he was not maybe all the way in on the possibility of taking on that kind of schedule. Maybe it's different for him now. Who knows? The other guy that stands out is John Jay. John Jay, who's been the first base coach in Miami the last couple of seasons under Skip Schumacher. If Skip doesn't end up getting a job this winter, which I know seemed crazy, but when you kind of look at the openings out there, if you're Skip Schumacher, do you want to go manage the White Sox? Is that what you like? Is that what you really want to do? Right. Or do you wait for a better opening? I think that kind of given the way that the playoffs have unfurled, ironically, there's a possibility that the outcome of Game 5 between the Dodgers and Padres might determine whether there's an opening in Los Angeles, right? I can see a scenario where if the Dodgers don't get out of the first round, that job could pop open maybe. And so if that's the case, then maybe Skip ends up there. But all a long way around to say that if Skip Schumacher doesn't end up as a big league manager this winter, then John Jay could return to the Marlins. He's got connections to Miami, does a lot of work with the U, may not be interested in leaving Miami. But also has a really strong connection to Oli Marmol and the Cardinals organization. Obviously, Daniel Descalso in particular, who will be returning as the bench coach. Descalso and Jay are partners in the sunglasses company, right? These are guys who have a relationship. It would not shock me if John Jay was the guy who got some consideration for that position as well, if he was in a spot where he was looking to leave Miami.
All right, some stuff to think about there. I think you know how the Cardinal fans are. They kind of like having their boys come home and be a part of the team again. So I definitely could see John Jay being welcome back with open arms if that's something that ends up happening. Now, payroll is something that has obviously been a hot topic of discussion since their season-ending press conference that they held when they announced the reset. We're going to talk to Jeff about that and which veterans he thinks will or will not be back in a Cardinals uniform next season. That's coming up next on Locked On Cardinals. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. So if you haven't visited them yet, you obviously should be doing that. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. Now, you just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. So you run your game all season long on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. That's all you got to get. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users. There's a reason why they got that many people there. Sign up today. PrizePicks puts its members first, so all your withdrawals, they're fast, they're safe, they're secure, which is great. And when your picks hit, you can get your money in as quick as 15 minutes. So sign up today and get $50 instantly. When you play $5, you don't even need to win, actually, to receive the $50 bonus because it's guaranteed. PrizePicks, the best way to win real money this football season. Thursday Night Football tonight, 49ers at the Seahawks. A lot of big names involved in this game tonight. Brock Purdy, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Kenneth Walker, DK Metcalf, Geno Smith over there on the Seattle side. Which players are going to go off? Who's going to struggle? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on PrizePicks. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. This episode of Locked On Cardinals also brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, explore the U.S. cities that you always secretly wanted to learn more about. They've got hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, so much more available to you at Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city. With Booking.com's wide variety of choices across the U.S., you can go incognito to all of your baseball rival cities like Chicago, Milwaukee, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. Booking.com can deliver exactly the right U.S. stay for you. They can help you book a stay that's, close to your hometown's favorite team or your rival stadium, if that's where you decide to go. From hotels that overlook the stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfast stays and so much more, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, booking.yeah. Thanks for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen every day. You can leave comments on YouTube as well as on Twitter X anytime you want. That feedback always welcome and encouraged. We got Jeff Jones, who covers the Cardinals for the Belleville News Democrat, joining us today. You can find him at JM Jones on Twitter X and check out his work at bnd.com. Now, Jeff, you did a piece on the budget right when October rolled over. In it, you had the press conference with ownership and the front office talking about Chaim Bloom coming in, and then they started talking about payroll and budgets and all that jazz. And some of that stuff can get a little confusing. I'll be honest, I'm mathematically challenged. I'm not the smartest guy in the world when it comes to that stuff. And one of the things that you were saying in this article is how things didn't stand up to the simple math. Okay. Can you explain what you meant about that for folks like me to understand it a little bit better?
Yeah. So the one caveat that I will put on this is that the Cardinals, to the absolute minimum credit, never made the claim that they will dollar for dollar replace everything they're cutting in payroll with everything that everything that they're going to be adding to player development, right? So that is not a claim that they made. So it's up to whoever to determine whether or not you care or you think that should be a dollar replacement. The only thing that I will say is that Bill DeWitt III was on a podcast with Martin Kilcoyne in May, and was asked about fan attendance, and he made the comment then, and the quote was, "This is a machine that turns revenue into payroll," right? And if that is the case, and payroll goes way down, then it would need to be reinvested somewhere else for that to still be true. I think that clearly is not the case. The other thing that I'll say is a big part of their revenue pie, undoubtedly, is their local TV broadcast, right? Last year that amounted to something in the neighborhood of $60 million that they got from Diamond in order to air the games. Now, obviously, last winter we heard about some of the lack of solid air. That number was kind of uncertain based on the bankruptcy proceedings for Diamond. It turned out that the Cardinals got their full check. They didn't miss a dime out from what they were expecting from Diamond. In the days, in fact, maybe the day after the press conference, Diamond went to a bankruptcy hearing and announced that they were dropping, I think it's 3 or 4 more teams, and that they are seeking to renegotiate their contracts for next year with every other team that they carry, including the Cardinals, right? And so because of the bankruptcy proceeding, this is allowed, and yada, yada, yada. MLB's claim at the time was that they were blindsided by this. They were not expecting that. And so whatever revenue projections the Cardinals may have had for next year that included any money from Diamond are maybe not valid anymore. All of that is a long way around to saying, if you look at what revenues were for the Cardinals in 2023, and Forbes every year puts out a story where they list the franchise values, they list their estimated revenues and expenditures, et cetera, right? These things are all a little bit fuzzy just because the Cardinals are a privately held company. Their finances are not public. So there's really no way to verify what their revenues were, what the expenditures exactly were, et cetera, et cetera. But the revenues for 2023 were somewhere in the neighborhood of $385 million. That's gross revenue, right? So payroll gets paid out of that. Operating the building, minor leagues, player development, et cetera, et cetera. The other important number to keep in mind here is that Mozeliak, after the press availability after the press conference had a smaller availability for the local reporters, and said that he anticipated that it would be an 8 to 12% increase in player development next season, right? So roughly 10%. That's the midpoint of 8 and 12. Easy enough, right? So for the Cardinals to have had $380 million in revenue, to have spent, which we know what they spent on payroll was in the vicinity of $205, $210 million, somewhere in there. The Cardinals have not been willing to sort of break down, what percentage is payroll, what percentage is player development, what percentage is the stadium, just because, from that you could back figure a lot of their revenues. And, spoiler alert, they're going to be coming for some public money here in the next couple of years for the stadium, right? So they're going to be a little more finicky about that than usual. All of that is to say that if the Cardinals were to just let their free agents walk, so we're talking about Lynn, Gibson, Goldschmidt, Carpenter, Middleton, Kittredge, if they just let those guys walk, by the time that they've paid out their buyouts and also accounting for Sonny Gray's raise as well as arbitration raises, if they only let the free agents go and replace the free agents with league minimum guys, so like the easiest way to do this, right? That shaves about 35-ish million off the payroll. 35 million shaved off the payroll has to be more than 10% of what they were spending on player development by math, right? By math, they could not have possibly been spending more than, say, 100 million on player development. And by the way, it's way less. It's like way less. 100 million is a way overestimate, right? But just by basic, like the absolute most you can possibly mathematically come up with for them to spend on player development is 100 million bucks. So if they're going to be spending, say, 10, 12 million more on player development next season, again, I have to emphasize this, it is less. It is definitely less, but in the most generous to them interpretation possible. If they're spending 10 to 12 million more on player development next season, but cutting 35 off the payroll, then there's like 23 million bucks in the middle that don't appear to be going anywhere other than true ownership. That's the only place they can go. That's revenue that's not being turned in, unless their argument is going to be that they have like $25 million in planned capital improvements on the stadium next season, and they don't. They're talking about they're going to be breaking ground on redoing the facility in Jupiter this winter.
Right.
That will be an outlay, but there is public money involved there as well. As far back as 2019, Palm Beach County approved $110 million in public money. I think it was split 55-55 between the Cardinals and the Marlins to redo Roger Dean. So there will be an outlay there, but it's not going to be that much. It's really not. So the bottom line is, just by taking their estimated revenues, taking their payroll, and very conservatively anticipating a cut, there's a huge gap in between what they're cutting out of expenditures and what exists in revenues. Now, again, some of that is different in the world where the TV contract is a little up to. I understand that. The Cardinals are probably not going to get $60 million for their TV rights next year, but they're not going to get nothing. And their cuts, by the way, are going to exceed that $35 million number. And I guarantee you the dollar increase in player development spending will be less than $10 million. So there is a huge gap in there that can't really be accounted for.
Okay. So we think that if that all plays out the way it is, that this is money that if they do need to sign some people, or like a Ryan Howley who's due for a raise, maybe they have money there to pay something like that if they want to. But this is more of a decision where they just want to lower things, not because they have to lower things. Is that kind of what we're saying?
Exactly right. That interpretation is very charitable. It is far more likely that Ryan Howley is traded this winter than that he signs an extension, right? But yeah, the bottom line is there's no reason why they couldn't increase their investment in player development and also spend on big league free agents. The league does not make you pick one or the other. You can definitely do both, right? And choosing not to do both is, number one, an acknowledgement that you don't think that there are things in free agency that can help you compete, which I don't agree with. Not even remotely, but that's fine. And also that you're going to be turning a little bit more of a short-term profit, right? This is sort of the dirty little secret of rebuilding, is that owners like it because they are spending less and keeping more, right? Yeah. They can say what they want about, competitive futures and competitive success. Owners make more money sometimes with rebuilding teams than they do with competitive teams.
Yeah, because they don't have to pay as much for the expensive guys to win those games. When I watch watching the playoffs right now, and you go and look at it, what the payrolls for Philly was and what the Mets were, and I'm like, I wonder how much money they're actually making in the long end of it all, being because of their $300 million payrolls that they got going on right now.
Which is interesting. And the Mets are spending something like $100 million on guys who are not playing for them this year, right? Their payroll of guys who aren't on the team has to be much bigger than Cleveland's and Detroit's this year, right?
Yeah.
But, so why is it worth it? Number one, Steve Cohen is a Mets fan. He wants to win. Great. But number two, because Steve Cohen owns the Mets and the Mets are popular and successful, Steve Cohen can lean on the state of New York to give him a land deal at a profitable rate and allow him to build a casino next door to Citi Field, which is what Steve Cohen wants to do, which is worth billions over the lifetime. So, is Steve Cohen maybe out of pocket going to lose, say, $30 million this year? I think there's basically no chance of that. But even if we just assume that, sure, Steve Cohen is going to eat $30 million in loss in this year in cash losses, I guarantee you the investment is multiple times fold over, right? The Cardinals were purchased for a net $75 million. The purchase price was $150. It was the team in the parking garages. They sold the garages a year later for $75. They recouped half the sale. $75 million got the team to the DeWitt Group that owns it now. The team now is worth $2.5 billion.
Yeah.
So if there is a little bit of cash loss year over year, that probably is one that they could absorb, given the asset that they've acquired underneath it as multiplied in value. But that's not how team owners think, right? And again, I know I'm rambling about this, but the other important thing to remember is when teams talk about their revenues and what losses look like, sometimes they're not actually talking about losses. They're talking about coming in under projection. and
Yeah.
describing that as loss. That is not the same thing. If you think you're going to make $20 million next year and you only make 15, you didn't lose $5 million. You made 15, right? These don't describe the same thing. But
Yeah.
team owners, when they describe their revenues, describe them as though they are the same thing, because it makes fans look at all the greedy players who want to make $25 million a year. That's fine. The owner put like a 0 and some other digits in front of that, and that's what the owner is making any given year.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that's very enlightening, if you will. So, make sure you guys check out Jeff's story. I'm going to link it in the description. I'll put it in the show notes for everybody as well. But it's up at bnd.com. Just hit the little Cardinals tab there, and it takes you right to all of Jeff's work. So we're going to talk about some of the big contracts that still remain on this team, whether or not Jeff thinks any of those guys are going to get moved. Plus, we'll talk about some of the bright spots heading into 2025 next on Locked On Cardinals. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. You know how sometimes you'll be watching a game and you can just sense a trend is happening. You get a hunch, if you will, in the middle of the game. And now you can check out the latest stats. You can view the live play-by-play and so much more, and do it on the same page where you place your bets on the FanDuel app. They make it easily and accessible to you so you're not flipping around and then you get lost and you don't know what you're doing on there. They make it very easy for you. Tonight's game with the 49ers and the Seahawks, perhaps you're liking the way that Jordan Mason, who's filled in pretty good for Christian McCaffrey. You like how he's running the ball for the Niners. Personally, I'm hoping for big things from Kenneth Walker. Fantasy-wise, he's been one of those guys, he was out a couple of weeks, but it was one of the guys I'm banking on to be really good for my team this year. Randomly just had 5 carries last week. I don't know what that was about, considering he scored 3 times on the ground the previous week, but I digress. FanDuel will get you started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Thank you for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On MLB podcast. Prepare for the Fall Classic that's happening right now. As we mentioned earlier, a lot of the exciting games going on throughout Major League Baseball. It's been a lot of fun to watch these teams just go back and forth against each other. And Sully has got you covered on Locked On MLB about all the games, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Jeff Jones covers the Cardinals for the Belleville News Democrat with us today. Talking about, payroll, and they mentioned that payroll would be going down. We just kind of described how it doesn't necessarily have to happen, but there's this idea that there's this doomsday scenario coming for the Cardinals where everybody's for sale. Like, we remember, it always reminds me of the Marlins years ago. They won a World Series, and then they got rid of everybody. I don't foresee that being the case, but there's been a lot of talk that some of these bigger contracts that still remain for veterans like Nolan Arenado, Sonny Gray, Wilson Contreras, these are guys that might be shopped this offseason. What are your thoughts on that? And of those 3 guys, which one do you think is more likely to get enough attention that the Cardinals might make a move with them?
So, of the 3, that's an interesting question. Arenado, I guess, would be the one that would be easiest to move, only insofar as he comes with pedigree. He comes with not that much money remaining. Actually, it's 3 years and it's a hair less than $60 million. It's perfectly manageable amount of money, and he plays a premium position. And so, you could definitely see teams that would want to bite there. With Sonny Gray, it's only 2 years left, but it is $65 million in cash, and he holds a full no trade. And so, we heard a lot last winter about how it was important to Sonny to be within driving distance to home. He got pretty close with the Cincinnati Reds last winter before the Cardinals kind of swooped in at the last moment. So, if Sonny comes to the Cardinals and says, okay, great, I'm happy to take a trade, but it needs to be to only Cincinnati or Atlanta, and those deals aren't easy to figure out, then that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. And then in terms of Contreras, again, Wilson holds a no trade clause, so he has a lot of control here as well. It's 4 years left on that deal, I believe, or 3 with an option maybe, actually. And again, the cash he's owed is roughly the same as what's owed to Arenado. It's like 57, 58 million, somewhere in there. But with Wilson, the question is always going to be, and it's going to be the question for the Cardinals if he stays and plays out the contract. It's going to be the question wherever he might end up being. does the team really think that as he gets into his middle 30s, he's going to remain behind the plate? And if he doesn't, does that mean first base? Does that mean he's a DH? Is the corner outfield actually a thing? I think probably not, right? So it's a little bit of a smaller pool of guys to which he can be moved. And the other thing, too, is that we do have there is some empiric information that we have from that, only because Contreras was, a candidate to be dealt at the deadline in 22. He was a free agent the winter of 22 into 23, so we can sort of see how the league viewed him, at least 2 years ago, and get a sense that I think there are a lot of teams that could benefit from him, but there don't appear to be a whole lot of teams who would be super interested in working up a market that he's involved in. So, maybe of the three, Contreras is the most likely to stay, and flip a coin between Arenado and Gray that probably is weighted in the Arenado direction for who was more likely between those two.
Ryan Howley, we touched on that a little bit earlier. Do a big raise in arbitration, then we'll become a free agent. How do you see this ending? Do you think the Cardinals do anything to try to retain him, or do you likely think that he's moved this offseason so that way there's still a year of control for whoever trades for him? They get him for at least this 1 year instead of waiting around till the deadline next year.
Yeah, I would be surprised if he wasn't moved this winter. And that would be the case, even if this team had made the postseason, or even if this team was going into the winter and they weren't going to be going into this kind of reset, rebuild, whatever mode, it would still be likely that Howley would be traded this winter, just because, as you mentioned, one more year of team control. With the reliever, the risk is always holding on a little too long. Things happen. Guys get hurt, right? Like Howley has his own injury history. And so it benefits the Cardinals almost certainly to make that move this winter, just because that way you guarantee you're trading him when he's healthy. He's never going to have more value than he does right now, where he was one of the two best relievers in baseball last season. He's never, he will never have under, this team control more value than he has right now. And if you're the Cardinals and you're looking at a competitive window that maybe isn't going to really open back up for 2 or 3 years, what good does having one of the best closers in the game do for you? Probably not very much, right? His value to them is not as high as it has been, and his value to other teams will ever be higher, and that's when you see a guy get traded.
Who's somebody that, because one of the things, I feel like a lot of people are like, we get it, we understand why Howley will get traded. Who do you see as somebody that might be able to step into a closer type of role, or do you think it kind of goes, a little bullpen by committee type of scenario to close out games for next year with the people that we have under control right now on this current roster?
So the first guy that jumps to mind is Jojo Romero, just because we saw him do it at the end of the 23 season. Now, Romero did not finish the year healthy. It didn't sound like a huge deal. If you remember, he also didn't finish 23 healthy either. He was in the IL to finish that season, but has closed and was pretty good down the stretch. Romero's pitch profiling in the second half, the spin, the velocity, didn't look great. He had some, really not great things going on underneath the hood in the second half of 24. And so the fact that culminates in an injury makes you kind of wonder what his winter looks like and how much he can be relied on going in the next season. I think if you were to pick out a guy today who is really not really likely, but who I would really keep an eye on in terms of closing games, it would be Matthew Liberatore. I think that the way that they have talked about the success he's had as a reliever, the success that we've seen him have as a reliever, his durability, where he's at kind of personality-wise, and while they would never admit this, the still present desire to make that Arozarena trade look less bad, right? I think all of those things are variables to certain value, but all point toward Liberatore being a guy who is going to get a real shot at some important back-end innings next season.
Yeah, and I am full on board with that. I loved what I saw from Liberatore at the end of the year. Sure, he had a couple of hiccups here and there, but I don't know. He looked awfully comfortable there in the bullpen at the end, near the end of games and stuff. And I dug that big time. So he's the guy that I've kind of been like, yeah, I think that might be your dude if they end up going with one guy, which may not
that
be
would not. And they may not, but that for sure is the guy who just jumps off the page to me. And the other guy too that we should mention, maybe not quite, he doesn't have the same level of experience yet, is Chris Roycroft, right? Because they love the way that he pops off the page, on the radar. and what his pitch mix looks like, a guy who doesn't scare. Those would be the two guys to me that I would see getting a lot of looks toward the back end of games, or at least more than they got this year.
Next year, as far as the rotation goes, as of right now, you've still got Sonny, you got a Fetty, you've got Michaelis, you've got Mats, but you've also got a Palante, you got a McGreevy, and then we saw Quinn Mathews skyrocket through this organization last year. And then, at the end of the year, and I pointed this out, I was like, well, he's throwing a lot of innings, man. He's probably wearing down a little bit. If you had to move like 3 different times and go through everything he did in his first full year of pro ball, he's probably a little exhausted by the time he got to Memphis. But what kind of role do you think Mathews might have as far as an impact on the major league roster next year? And would it make moving somebody like Sonny Gray a little easier for the Cardinals to do?
So I will start with that in saying that I don't think it's quite that analogous, only in as much as the Cardinals would not be expecting Mathews to be able to come in and replace Gray's production, right? The hope would be that he could replace some of the innings, and that's possible, And I wrote about this this afternoon. It may be up now, may go up tomorrow morning, about kind of the guys in the rotation. A year ago we were talking about going out and getting the Cardinals signing 3 veterans in free agency to sort of stabilize and lock down that rotation. Now we're going to be in a point this winter where, I don't expect them to pick up Lance Lynn's option. It doesn't sound like they're picking up Kyle Gibson's. I know there are people in the organization who, even on a rebuilding team, think the Cardinals should be picking up Gibson's option, if for no other reason than somebody has to physically take the ball. And that's the guy who you want to be like a veteran leader in that room for guys like Mathews. And that has value. Does it have like $12 million in salary value? A team that's looking to cut, we'll see. Just in terms of where does Mathews fit in, I think he will be invited to big league camp. I think he'll have every opportunity to make a mark. I think to make the club out of spring would either require some significant injuries, or might require him just like pitching the lights out in spring. Having one of these 0 ERA springs, if for no other reason than there's not a real incentive for the Cardinals to punch the gas on him, right? Like, historically, to their credit, we have not historically talked about the Cardinals in terms of being a team that artificially holds guys back from service time, right? They really have not historically been big service time manipulators. They did it a little bit to Dylan Carlson in 2020, but, everybody got COVID. It was a weird year. Yeah. That's all to say that Mathews is a guy who, from a cynical team perspective, you could really make a good argument for not having in the big leagues before June 1st next year for basically any reason, because either he's not what you hope that he is today, in which case, whatever, he'll perform at AAA and he'll figure it out. Or if he is what the Cardinals hope that he is today, what reason does a rebuilding team need to have that guy pitching for them before June 1st and putting himself in a position where he might, who might earn that extra year of service time? That's not great from a player perspective, and it's not great for fans either. But I can very easily see the team kind of making that leap and getting themselves to that point. In terms of the rest of the veteran guys, I think that Eddie would be easy to trade if they were so inclined to do that. He actually, at the end of the year after his last start in St. Louis, was asked, what did you make of it? How happy you'd be coming back, yada, yada, yada. And essentially said, well, I have a deal for next year, but I have to get through the winter meetings first. And was, very self-aware of the fact that if this is a team that's going to step back, he's going to be a really popular trade guy. The other guy who I think is a very obvious trade candidate is Steven Matz, right? Just because he hasn't been healthy for 3 years, really, but he has been pretty good out of the bullpen. He has started. He's had decent stretches, and it's 1 year. It's only $12 million. And he has no trade protection, so he could go anywhere where somebody was interested, right? And, the Cardinals are in a spot where maybe just in terms of, ease of asset to move, that Matz and Fetty are the guys who could very easily go this winter.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know if the shine on Eric Fetty has worn off completely. We saw a couple of games with the Cardinals where he was very good, and then he had a couple of games that weren't.
He made it was 10 starts and the ERA was right at 3.75. He was the comparison I drew at the end of the season was he's Jeff Suppan. He's perfectly fine. He's a good 3 or 4, and he can take the ball. And if he starts for the Cardinals next year, they will probably win more of his games than they lose. But as a guy, he's with a 1-year deal at only 7.5. Again, what does a really good 4-starter get the Cardinals compared to what is the return for that guy this winter?
Yeah, and that's kind of where my Quinn Mathews thoughts go to, is like, if you start shipping some of these veterans around, and like you said, somebody's got to pitch. There's got to be somebody who takes the ball. So
and to that end, and to that end too, I will say that if the Cardinals do decline the option on Gibson, it would not totally shock me if they came back to him in free agency, right? They can decline the option and then sign him to a different deal
for cheaper.
So, right, exactly. So is there, because his option is for $10 million, they have to pay him $1 million. Or his option is for 12. They have to pay him $1 million buyout. So it's an $11 million decision either way, right? Could they come back to him and sign him for 1 year and 10 after they could very easily do something like that.
Okay. So we've got some flexibility there. Gonna wrap things up now because running a little bit long on time or whatever, but hopefully we'll get you back here when some more news breaks and stuff on what's going on with the Cardinals. We can talk more about the futures of guys like Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman, and how reliant they're going to be on those guys coming up in 2025 if they do plan to compete at all for a division title or anything, or just trying to stay above 500, whatever the goal may be for next year. Hopefully we'll get Jeff back on to talk a little bit more about that. But thank you guys for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen every day. If you haven't already, give us a follow on Twitter X at LO_Cardinals and at JD Sports Radio. Again, you can follow Jeff on Twitter X at JM Jones. Of course, hit him up at BND.com, the Belleville News Democrat, to read all his coverage on the Cardinals. Jeff, as always, appreciate your time and appreciate your patience with people like me trying to understand what's going on money-wise with the Cardinals and Major League Baseball, buddy.
No. Clearly, I'm happy to explain to anybody who wants to listen. No, I'm happy to do it anytime.
All right. So go check out Jeff. And remember, you guys are the best fans in baseball for a reason. And we will see you next time on Locked On Cardinals.